based on this, we carry on the research activity. Now, where we have different kinds of types of hypothesis. The first type is crude hypothesis. Now, as the name suggests itself, crude means when I have the research problem, I do not know what the hypothesis is that I had to test. For instance, if I would like to know there is a bus service which is running at a particular route, which is generating a very less revenue. Okay, so I have a bus which is running through one route, but it is generating the revenue generated by it is very low. So when I do a study, I just assume that might be that there are no people who take that bus. That is why I see and I just cancel that bus route, or I just stop with that bus itself to go through that route. But after I conduct a research, I find out that the people who are there are unaware of the availability of such a bus service, because of which they are not able to take the bus route. So once I start with the problem, once I do the research only, that I come to know the various reasons for it. Now, since I have found out what is the reason why there is low revenue generated through this bus in route, only based on this that I would do my further research on. Is this clear? What is crude hypothesis? I repeat it once again. An example of crude hypothesis is an en route of a bus. The bus goes through a particular route and I generate very low income because of this. So the reason I assume could be that the people don't take up, or there are less takers for this bus service. But when I do a research, I find out that people are not aware of this itself. So what is the reason for it? Once I carry on the research only, it is I am able to find out the exact reason. Based on the result that I am deriving of, then I would continue with the further research. This is known as crude hypothesis. Is it clear or disturbing, students? Clear?
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay. The next one is refined research. This is just the opposite of what crude hypothesis is. Under a refined hypothesis, I already know that if this is the problem or if this is the solution which is provided, then this would be the reaction. For example, if I say that the income tax slab rates are reduced, then I would have more people who would pay tax instead of avoiding tax. I repeat, refined hypothesis is one in which I am clear if I take certain step, this would be the action, or the following would be the action. So under that circumstance, an example for which is, for example, if I know that I will be reducing the tax slab and bring down the minimum amount or the maximum amount, and I do some variation in the tax rate. If that is good, then I would have more people who would pay tax instead of evading tax. Is that clear? This is known as refined hypothesis, where I'm clear on what is the reason. Crude hypothesis and refined hypothesis. Next is the working hypothesis. Working hypothesis is, for instance, I'll give you an example for this. Monetary incentives act as a great motivator. So this is the hypothesis. Monetary incentives are great motivators. Based on this hypothesis, I develop or I find out the various solutions which are workable, and then I take it forward for my research activity. Am I clear, students? The first three one, crude hypothesis. Okay. Second one is refined hypothesis, and the third one is working hypothesis. Working hypothesis is once I find out the different factors affecting a particular solution, I try to find and I will try to elaborate or find in detail about each of these problems. That is working hypothesis. The next one is statistical hypothesis, as the name suggests itself. For example, if what is the relation between two hypotheses is what we do under statistical hypothesis. For example, just one moment. Like if I wanted to study the consumption behavior of sample respondents, how would be the response based on the behavior of people in a state would be inferred. So under a statistical hypothesis, I take two variables and then I compare using these variables in itself. I develop the further research. So crude hypothesis is I first try to find out what would be the problem and then I do further investigation. Refined as I am clear on what the hypothesis is. I don't need to do an analysis or find out. Working hypothesis is working on the various alternatives which is available to an hypothesis. And statistical hypothesis is you try to derive a relationship between two variables and based on this you do your further research. Now the next two are the most important hypothesis, which is the null hypothesis and the alternate hypothesis. Now null hypothesis, as the very name suggests, it is an hypothesis wherein which is formulated only to find out a relationship between two variables related to a problem, and it is formed as a negative statement. So again in null hypothesis, two variables are compared. What is the relationship between these two variables is compared, and then whatever is in negative, it is normally a negative statement. For example, what is the relationship between the eyes of husband and wife? Is there any relationship? Generally, it is not, or normally, it is not. Relationship between the eyes of a husband and wife. So, this is known as a null hypothesis because I derive at a conclusion that it is a negative statement which says that there is no relationship between the eyes of a husband, and there is no relationship between eyes of a husband or an eye of a wife. Am I clear, student? Are you able to follow null hypothesis? It is a statement which is a most negative statement which is rejected. An example for which is relationship between two variables, which is the eyes of husband and wife. They need not make any impact. So it is a rejected. If there is no relationship between the eyes of a husband and wife, that is why we call it as a null hypothesis. So it is normally a negative statement. When we come to an alternate hypothesis, it is just the opposite of what null hypothesis. In this, once I test the relationship between the eyes of husband and wife, I find it that there is no relation. If there is no relation, then what is the reason for it is what I try to find out. That is what is known as null, and sorry, that is what is known as alternate hypothesis. Is that clear? All the five types. First one, crude
Yes, ma'am.
hypothesis, refined hypothesis, working hypothesis, statistical hypothesis. Null is, keep in mind, it is a negative statement. And the last one is alternate hypothesis. Clear with this, all of you? Okay. Now, apart from this, we have something called type 1 error and type 2 error. While developing an hypothesis, we might have type 1 error and type 2 error. Now, what is a type 1 error? Type 1 error is committed when the null hypothesis is rejected when it should have been accepted. Then we have an error in the whole research itself. That is a type 1. When I had to when I had to reject the null hypothesis, but I have accepted. So, null hypothesis rejected, but I had accepted it. That is type 1 error. Type 2 error is the other one, whereas I had accepted the null hypothesis when I had to reject. So, type 1 is null hypothesis rejected when I had to accept. Type 2 is I had accepted the null hypothesis when I had to reject. Is it confusing? Clear? Can you make a note of it? Otherwise, what is null hypothesis?
Yes,
What is
ma'am.
alternate hypothesis?
Ma'am, can you
What is
repeat
type
from
1 error?
alternate hypothesis?
Yes, Sunny.
Alternate hypothesis.
Okay. You want to understand what is alternate. Alternate hypothesis is just the opposite of what. Once I find that the statement is rejected or the null hypothesis is rejected, then it automatically becomes an alternate hypothesis. That is, there is a relationship between the eye color of the husband and wife is what I accept. When the null hypothesis is rejected, then I accept the null hypothesis. That is what is known as alternate hypothesis. So null hypothesis is negative and alternate hypothesis is positive, where I accept it. The two variables or the relationship between two variables is accepted, that is alternate. When I reject it, where there is no relationship, that is alternate hypothesis. And type 1 error is when I had to reject the null hypothesis but I had accepted. And type 2 is when I had to accept the null hypothesis but I had rejected it. Only this, if you remember, it would be just sufficient. Is it clear now? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Until you have your notes, I don't think it would be clear. But just for your reference, at least for the time being, you're able to understand this. So this is what is with reference to hypothesis, what is hypothesis and the different types of hypothesis. We'll quickly do with what is research design. Now, while I can conduct the research, I would also go with research design. Research design is nothing but planning up the research activity or planning up the research process itself. How is it that I'm going to conduct? What are the data? What is the sample size? What is the random sample or which sampling technique am I going to use? What are the different people whom I'm going to survey? How is it that I'm going to tabulate? What is the statistical tools that I'm going to use? What is the time span within which each one of these processes I want to complete? What is the total cost involved in conducting each of these processes? So all these various processes which I'm going to do a research on, I do a research design. Now the effect, what is the result? Why is it helpful for me? So that I would be sticking to what my objective is and I carry on the research accordingly without any deviation. I would be up to the mark of what I require and what I am getting. So this is a major, see that my research is effective, that I carry on. I need to do a research design. It also needs to be flexible so that when and where there are changes required, I should be able in a position that I change and continue further as well. It also helps me when I do how well am I utilizing my time, my money, and also the resources which are available. How well or how planned am I using the major three resources which is used, which is time, money, resources, that is your manpower, etc. Now, research design, having understood, it is just a plan of how you are going to carry on your research. There are again three types of research design, which we have already done in what is the types of research. The first one is exploratory research design, in which I am doing the research for the first time. So I would not be having an idea of what is a research plan. So roughly I draft how my research plan is, and as and when I do my research, I do a planning of my research accordingly. That is known as exploratory, or which is also known as formulative research design. So this research design I come through or I derive at using the previous data, experiences of previous researchers which have done, doing an extensive literature survey, etc. So this is exploratory research design, just an extension of what exploratory research is. The second one is descriptive and diagnostic research design. In this, there are various factors which I will have to explore and find out. And in these factors, descriptive is total. There are a number of factors that I have got to develop. For example, if I would like to know the identify on the what is the effect of consumption behavior of on a particular product. So there are various things which are attached to it. It might be the gender, it might be the age group, it might be the different other characteristics, how frequent buyer I am, how brand loyal I am, etc. So this is descriptive in nature, where I would like to know the consumption behavior of this individual. Diagnostic approach research design, any idea? Anyone would like to guess what would it be?
I'm trying to find solution
Exactly.
for a problem.
Now this is first, there are again two variables. If this is applied, like I gave you an example of crops or the pesticides which are used for the crops. So this is a diagnostic research which I can say, wherein I am going to find out what is the relationship between this and then carry on the further research plan. The final one is experimental research design, where I am doing it for the first time. So I would have a flexible plan for this as such, and as I carry on the research activity, I draw my research design as well. So we have exploratory or the fundamental research design. Second one, we have the descriptive and diagnostic research design. And thirdly, we have the experimental research design. All these are related to what are your different types of research itself. Finally, we would come to what are the factors affecting the research design. What is it that we need to be very careful, where we cannot derive at a particular or a constant or a flexible, which is not the same research design. One is non-availability of sufficient data. So I need to be flexible and change according to the process, each step that I do. Secondly is availability of time. Time is a major constraint. I cannot wait for getting another and then carry on the same thing. So this is a major constraint in designing my research. Third one is availability of resources. When I say availability of resources, it means how skilled the person is who carries on, how the respondents, how do they have, do they respond properly, the time taken, how efficient is the questions which are asked, how effectively is the respondents who are answered. So availability of resources and how effectively am I using them as well. And the last one is ability of the researcher. Now, this is a major one. The researcher should have an ability to judge, make a statement, and move himself accordingly so that he does not deviate from what is the objective of conducting a research. So, the factors affecting research design is majorly four: non-availability of sufficient data, availability of time, availability of resources, and finally, ability of the researcher. How efficient is he able to carry forward? Any doubts, students? We'll just stop with this today. So we've completed today with and what are the different types of hypothesis? Expect a short question: null hypothesis, alternate hypothesis, what is type 1 error, type 2 error, etc. You can definitely expect this. And what is research design? What are the different types of research design? All these are also very important. Any doubts still here, students?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Even anytime, if you come through this later, if you would like to know, you can just get back to me. So going forward, the entire research I would be taking for you, research methodology. And next we would be starting the chapter unit 3, which is data sample designing and data collection, etc. I'm just sharing the Google attendance link, students. You can fill up your attendance. I'll close it up in another 5 minutes because I want only the students who are here to fill it up. Those who have any